This is a skill that every top achiever or every consistent project management performer learn how to do that, and they are going to do that well in practice. My name is Guilherme and I'm a project management expert. I help professionals to become successful project managers. What I do in practice, I have project management development programs to help people to gain the knowledge in project management. So you're going to need to learn waterfall, agile, scrum, frameworks, critical path, WBS, but also to help them to understand how they implement this in practice to get the results that you need there. So, and of course, before I start, don't forget to like and share this video here so more people can learn project management, and you also help me to see the value of the content I'm creating here for you. But also, this is part of the warm up for the Project Management Summit that's going to start. That Project Management Summit, it's a free event I'm going to make to teach you how to develop your skills and to talk about how you can move in the project management mastery journey. That's what you can see in the screen here. So I'm not going to enter in the details in the project management mastery journey because that's one of the things that I'm going to discuss more in the project management summit. But I'm going to talk about today one of the skills that the top achievers, a top performer, if you want to call that, the project management mastery journey you see here in the level 9, but also in the level 7 or N. One of the skills they do to make sure that they have good results. And of course, you need this skill to be able to progress from the level 5 to level 7 and also to level 8. This skill is basically anticipation, if I'm putting like that. What is anticipation in practice? Is risk management. Let me make an analogy here to explain to you what do I mean by anticipation, by risk management, and I'm going to give you a practical example how you can do that or how it's done in real life. So the analogy is as follows. Think about your team. You're inside a car and your team is driving a car. Your goal as a project manager is, of course, making sure that your team can drive the car and they have everything they need to drive the car. But your goal is clear the road. So think about your team is driving a car there and you need to go in front. So you need to be ahead of your team to check how it's the road there. So you're going to find, okay, there's a roadblock, you clear the roadblock. Or so when your team gets there, they're going to be able to just drive the car through the road without major problems. If you go up front, if you go ahead of your team and you find that's a roadblock there, what you're going to do, you're going to discuss with your team a deviation in the route. Why? Say the road is blocked there. There's construction. We cannot go through that. We need to deviate that. And you're going to align with your team up front. What's the difference? And why I'm saying that you really need this skill to be a consistent performer or even a top achiever there? Because a lot of project managers they're going to think about that in a very short window. So what it needs to happen in 1 or 2 weeks. And they're going to be very busy with the team, going back to the analogy, inside of the car. Say, hey, you are driving, what's the speed you are driving? They're going to keep checking with the team how fast you are going, do we have gas? And don't get me wrong, if you're a good project manager, you need to understand, okay, what's the speed that your team is driving, if you have enough gas, if the car is working properly, is there any sign of maintenance ringing there, if the environment inside of the car it's okay, or the team is just fighting inside of the car. You need to understand those things. But how you really add value for your team is not just sitting in the car saying, look, I'm going to drive the car because then I'm going to control the speed and I can control everything else. You need to think ahead to make sure that when your team gets to the challenge, you are well prepared for that. So for 1 or 2 weeks, your team should be able to drive the car and should be able to manage most of the stuff there. So I'm not saying that you should disconsider everything that is going to do there. No, I'm saying that you prepare in advance so your team is aligned so they can drive the car for a few kilometers without you to make sure that you go ahead and find out, okay, what's the conditions of the road? Roadblocks, construction, it's rainy, so you need to control the speed that the team is going there. This is a simple analogy how a top achiever and a consistent project manager they work on. Okay, so you get a view in the analogy. How does it work in practice? So I'm going to give you I'm going to bring you a few examples to make sure that you understand. Every time that you talk about risk management, so let me just explain a bit on the concept. Risk management is basically you are forecasting a future and you are working anticipation. Why? Because if you are executing a project, let me put a timeline here. Let's say you are executing, here's the 0, the start of the project, and here's 2 years. If you are in, let me change the color to make it easier. So let's say that you are here, and I don't know, 2 months into project execution. From 2 months until you get to the 2 years, there's a lot of uncertainty. So you don't know if the supplier is going to deliver on time. You do not know, for example, someone in your team might leave the organization, someone might get sick, the customer might ask changes, the organization might restructure. So there's a lot of uncertainties out there. And depending on the type of project that you're working on, there's also the environmental uncertainties that you can have high exposure to. For example, construction. You don't know what's going to be the weather in 2 months. Might be rain, or depending where you're working on, you might have a earthquake, you might have a hurricane, and all those kind of things. So there's a lot of uncertainty in what you do. So risk management is understand that you live in a scenario of uncertainty, and you need to foresee or forecast different scenarios to anticipate for them. So what I'm talking about here, anticipation, if it's you are in the 2 month, the example I'm giving here, you are here. What you want to do as an anticipation? You want to think about, okay, what needs to happen here? What needs to happen here? What needs to happen here? And you're going to assess the types of risks that you have or stuff that needs to happen that your team can go through the road. Remember the analogy of the car, as smooth as possible. But if you have a 2 years project, of course, more you try to forecast in the future, more uncertainty that you're going to have. So it's very important that when you create your plan, you're going to have a full plan with the full overview. But of course, if you are in the 2 months, what needs to happen, for example, in the 3 months, in the 4 months, the 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, in this period here, you need to have a much higher of level of certainty, for example, and I'm putting at least in 6 months. Depending on the type of project can be longer, depending on the type of project can be a bit shorter, but you need to be able to forecast few months in advance. Why? Your team is going to be focusing today. Why? Because your team needs to execute their work. So let's think about a designer. The designer needs to think about the design of the house, if in the example that you are doing a house. Or the designer needs to think about the design of the car. Or the designer needs to think about, or the marketing needs to think about the marketing campaign. Or if you're working with a software, they need to think about the architecture of the software, the customer needs, the features, and everything that comes from the future. But your team needs to be grounded here in today because they need to do their work. If they keep thinking about ahead, they're not going to put effort in doing the work. So your team needs to be focused in doing the work now, in a window of 1 or 2 weeks. Around 2 weeks, it's a good. So your team needs to think about in a horizon there. They need to think about in a window of 2 weeks, while you as a project manager, you need to think about a window of 6 months. Let me give you an example to make this a bit more concrete. Uh, some time ago, I was working to a project there, and this was a semiconductor project there in the semiconductor industry. So how the semiconductor project goes, very roughly, you have a design phase. In this design phase, you freeze the design, you release this for manufacturing, and then you manufacture to produce samples. And with those samples, you're going to put this into qualification to release the product here. A very simple and high level, but that's enough to explain to you what my intent here. What happened is the design team is working on this. So let me change the color here. So my design team was working on that one. And as you can imagine, with a flow like that, the design freeze is part of the critical path, and they need to release something to the supplier or to the manufacturing site here. In this case, it was an external supplier. But what happened if the design team release or freeze the design and send to the manufacturing team? If it's an external supplier, the manufacturing team, of course, they are going to review it, but the manufacturing team will not start to work on anything unless they have a PO, a purchase order there, because that's how business work. They are not going to start to commit resource before they have a formal order there, although they can be a partner, everything else. All companies, they want a purchaser order there because that's quite important for them. What happened if you do not think ahead? So let's say that you're as a project manager, you're following up here with the design team, you're very focusing on what the design team is doing, blah 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 blah, and then suddenly the design team will have maybe a design review, or will get to a point that they say, okay, design is frozen here. Now you can kick off with the supplier. And that this day you kick off with the supplier, but then you say, but now I need to do the purchaser order. And then you can open a big box of things. So let me do even in a different color here. So to get to a purchaser order, you need time to approve the purchaser order in the companies. Very often in companies, you are going to see this from around 1 week at least, depending on the value of the purchaser order. But 1 week, it's quite standard there. Of course, if you get to a purchaser order of 10 million, that's going to take longer. If it's a purchaser order of 5K, 10K, 5,000, $10,000 euros, that's around 1 week, it seems about right. And to get to the point that they can approve the purchase or order, there's couple of 1 or 2 days that the team will need to process the order. So you raise a request and the team will need 1 or 2 days, depending on the organization here. Sometimes can be done in 1 day, depending how the organization structure works, it can be 1 or 2 days. But you have a time to create a purchase order here. Let's assume in this case 1 day. But to get to the point that you can select the purchase order, you need to have a quote. So at this point, you are going to have a quote here from the supplier or an RFQ. Depending on what you're quoting there, the supplier, they are going to depend, and depending on the supplier, I've seen suppliers that they can do quotes in a couple of days, from suppliers that take weeks to do a quote, depending on the complexity of the product, what you're doing, so on. But stay with me, it's 1 week. But to get to the point that the supplier can provide a quote for you, they need to have a design. So they need to have a design here, at least in a maturity that's good enough so they can quote it. Then they can align in the price. So this is, and all these things here, these are things that depending how you work, you are going to put this into the critical path. So depending how you are working, what's going to happen in reality. So let me draw it here. So you have your design freeze here. If you let everything to happen at the point that you have the design freeze, you're going to have few weeks here to get a code from supplier to process the PO and blah blah blah. And then you're going to go for the manufacturing part. Oops. And then you go for the qualification part. So if you do like that, visually you just increase the project duration. Why? Because you as a project manager, you forgot or you did not anticipate this type of risk. So what did I do in this project here that I mentioned to you? Well, I did the other way around. Say, I have a time pressure because this is a high priority project, time sensitivity. So what I did instead of this scenario here, what I do here, I discuss it with the design team. So I collect the input, say we need something that's mature enough that we can align with the supplier before the final version, which usually It's possible because the final version you're going to get depending what you're going to design, but there's a lot of other checks that you need to do, reviews and so on. So that's usually possible. I align these. I make sure that I get the code from the supplier. I make sure that I request the purchaser order, that's processed, and this is approved. And I always make sure this is done few days or depending 1 or 2 weeks before I have my design freeze. This is a way that I am anticipating. So around 2 months or 3 months, depending what I'm doing there and depending the complexity of what I'm doing, I start this discussion here. So maybe at least 2 months, I start this discussion here with the design team. Hey, we need to align with the supplier. We need to get something to a level that we can get a quote to the supplier that's firm enough that we can create a purchase order. So when you reach to the point of the design freeze, and to the point of the design freeze, you might have a lot of fine tuning to do here. And this is example I mentioned about semiconductor, but can be any type of example. You are going to do the fine tuning to make sure that you have. This is a way of you're anticipating, you're mitigating risk. What type of risk I'm mitigating if I do that? The risk of delay. Because what can happen in practice, and that's what I've seen happening even in projects where I work like that. So I ask the supplier, I organize something, get to a point that I have a design, then I ask to the supplier to create the code. But guess what? The commercial team of the supplier, for example, was located, let's say, in Europe, in France, and during that week in France, there's a bunch of holidays. I don't know, Labor Day or no other national holidays. So there's a lot of people out of the office. So it's not going to take 1 week. It's going to take 2 weeks. Then you are going to process it, and then when you get to a point to approve the PO, guess what? The approver that he is going to be, or he or she is going to be in a business trip, or he or she is going to be on holiday, and it's not going to take 1 week. It might take 2 weeks here. By anticipating this, and that's why I'm talking about anticipation, by thinking on this kind of stuff ahead, you can mitigate the risk of having this delay here. And depending how you create your plan, you have even a possibility to pull the timeline in. Because if you think about the scenario that you do everything in series, you have a release of the product here. In scenario that you do stuff, as I mentioned, in parallel, you have a release process here. And from the timeline that I'm discussing that to you, this is around at least 2 weeks. And this is one task. Imagine if you do that for several items. Your capability to think ahead, the idea that you need to think ahead, you need to anticipate what's going to happen, think on scenarios, that's risk management. That's risk management in practice there. So let me give you another example. Let me clean this up and I'm going to give you another example. So this example is from the automotive industry there. What happened here? Again, we were, in this case, the supplier was manufacturing components. What would need to happen? We would assemble the product, and then we would put this into a qualification to get to a point that you can have a release. In this case, the supplier lead time for some of those components was long, but while I was reviewing my plan, I found out an issue because this was an air suspension, so the issue was here in the assembly phase. This was an air suspension, and for different reasons, this air suspension had to be assembled for qualification without one of the components. But you can imagine if it's an air suspension, it needs to be airtight, means that it needs to be fully closed. If one of the components is not there, it's not going to be closed, so you cannot do the qualification on that one. So what I did, in this case, I think it was 3 or 4 months, around 3 or 4 months in advance. I was thinking about that, how we are going to assemble this, and I say, hey, but we are not going to use this component in the assembly. So how we are going to get a part that's airtight? So I come back to discuss with my lead designer there, And he said, wow, we are going to assemble that. And he told me, oh, we are manufacturing a special component, a special part that we can use to assemble that, and we are going to put in the qualification. And then you're going to say, okay, so it was covered. Yes and no. Then I asked to my lead designer, okay, how many of those special components that you are building on? And he told me two pieces. And I told him, that's fine, but we need to assemble 12. So we are short of parts. Meaning if I cannot get the 12 parts that I need here, I cannot start my qualification as planned. And again, I delay my release. And then he said, okay, that's true. And then I asked question, I asked, how long do you need to arrange this? Then he said, we already have the design, so it's good, but we buy it from an external supplier. And to produce those extra special components here, it takes around 10 weeks because it was something that's manufactured, mostly handmade, it's low quantity and so on. So because I saw that something at this stage here, so let's assume that this time here is, I don't know, 3 months. So because we had this discussion, I anticipate this risk, we added here the manufacturing of this thing at around 10 weeks. Or 10 weeks would be something like that. But what happened in practice? Though we get the component in time for the assembly. But because I was thinking about ahead, around 3 months ahead, what needs to happen. What do I see happening a lot with junior project managers, or not only junior project managers to be fair, with project managers that are stuck in the level 5. They are very focused on thinking about the next 2 weeks. So if I go back to the example or to the analogy of the car, they are very focused on what's happening inside of the car. Are the team members talking? What speed we are going? Do we have enough gas? Is there any sign? Do we see rain? Do we see a traffic jam ahead of us or anything like that? But when you look for the road and think about the road, it's the time to execute your project. The road can be long. A lot of projects can be very commonly five between 1 and 3 years. So when they are thinking on 2 weeks, they're only thinking something like that. I have this piece here. What happened then? So if you think about a road, when they get here, they found a roadblock. Oh, we need to have a purchase order to the supplier, otherwise the supplier will not start. Then they go running around to figure out that they need to have the purchase order. Do we have the quote? No. Then they push the supplier to get the urgent quote. It's urgent, urgent, urgent. Push, 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 push. Then they get the quote. They send to approval. Then they push, 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 push to get approved. And to be fair, that will happen anyway. But that cannot happen with everything into your project. If everything that you are executing there, you are executing like that, that's a sign that you have a low maturity there, that you are stuck in the level 5 or the level 6. And what's the reason for that? You have a low project manager maturity, that you're stuck in the practitioner plateau. Very recently, I see, in this case was a senior project manager, that he needs a hardware test to be sent to a supplier to test a product there. So let's say sometime in the future, the hardware needs to be there to get tested. And what happened is this hardware was in Europe. So, and let's say it needs to get put in a random day here. It needs to start the test on 1st of June. And the hardware was, or let me change the date because then I can make something. Let's say that the hardware you need to start the test it. So on 7th of May. That's very close to the date that I'm recording this video here. So, and today, let's say today is 2nd of May. And then you ask, okay, are we good to start the test on 7th of May? And then the supplier say, Yeah, no, we don't have the hardware because if you're expecting that people will tell you everything up front what they're needing, you are living a different world. You're not living a real world there. And then he find out, oh, but this test needs to happen. I don't know. I think in this case was Malaysia, and the hardware was in Europe, in the Netherlands. What's going to happen if he figure out that on the 2nd of May, the hardware is still in the Netherlands? He find out that he was late because just 1 week shipment, they could not do that. It would not arrive there in 5 days. Which usually takes 1 week. Depending on the carrier, can go a bit faster, or the standard lead time that you get is 1 week. So he go to the people responsible to ship the hardware to Malaysia and say, this needs to be shipped ASAP. It's urgent. You should have done. And he start to blame the other person why the person did not do that on time and blah blah blah. But in any case, this person was not even working for the project. This person was just there to ship stuff around for all the projects and for all the organization. But then the person say, I need more time because I need to prepare the documentation. I need to do this, and that. And he said, no, it needs to go done now, 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 now. And I think this was like in the afternoon. So you must do this now, now, this afternoon, this afternoon. Then the carrier pickup was, I don't know, 4 p.m. So the carrier pickup was 4 p.m. and this discussion was happening around 2 p.m. And the project manager keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, and at some point he tells the lady in the other side saying, ship it the way it is, just make sure it's done. Then she explained the procedure, says skip the procedure, blah blah blah, and just ship it. So she shipped the stuff, skipped some of the procedures that she usually do, and blah blah blah. What happened? She shipped the stuff, but because she skipped part of the procedures that they were important for the custom release, some pictures, some type of the paperwork that needs to be there, that was not because of the time pressure here. And then simply when get their customs, the customs check the paperwork, say, yeah, you are missing blah, 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 blah. So they ship the hardware back to the Netherlands. Short discussion, another week to get back to the Netherlands. Then you need to rearrange the paperwork and ship it back. So we are talking about here 3 weeks delay on the plan. And if I remember well, this test was part of the critical path of the project. So we are talking about 3 weeks delay on the critical path just because the project manager forgot that forgot to work on that plan to do some anticipation. And the worst part that this discussion and those dates are just example. I do not remember the exact dates there. The first thing or the first thing that you can hear that the hardware was in the Netherlands, for example, since 1st of February. So the hardware was sitting there for around 2 or 3 months. 3 months in this case. The hardware was sitting there for 3 months, but there was a critical step that was forgotten there. Because if when the hardware arrived there, this person was working on this anticipation risk management, he would ask, okay, the hardware is here. Yes. What do we need to, and you as a project manager, you don't need to understand everything. That's why you work with a team. What do you need to do with this hardware? So the team member would say they're responsible for that. You need this hardware that needs to be in Malaysia for the tests, blah, blah, blah. That's in the part of the critical path. So what a project manager that's on top of his game would do, or his or her game would do, would look for that and say, go for the lady that organized the shipments. So please make sure that you can ship these to Malaysia as soon as you can. So it's 1st of February. Let's say the lady say, okay, I'm going to do that in a couple of days. So she would follow all the paperwork without time pressure, follow all the procedures, ship this on 5th of February, and that would be in Malaysia around 12th of February. Well ahead in time So to make sure that the test is there. So what you're doing here, the guy is thinking, "Oh, I need to do a test on 7th of May. What do I need to do the test? Well, I need the hardware, I need the team, and I need the samples there. Do we have the hardware? Yes or no? Yeah, the hardware is in the Netherlands. We need to ship that. Okay, clear this roadblock. When do we have the samples? That's usually part of the critical path. Oh, the samples we are going to get on 6th of May. Cool. Do we have the people? Do we have the resources? Do we have the tester capacity and everything else? Then what you're doing that? You're clearing the road. That's why I use the analogy of the car. Think about the road that you have to drive. Your team is in the car here, and apologize for the bad drawing. Your team is in the car, and you go ahead of your team. So you go ahead, and if you want to put in example of the road trip, you go ahead 20 kilometers from your team, and you find out what's going on there. And then you are going to start to clear the roadblocks. Some of the roadblocks, it's very easy to clean. Might take 1 week, couple of days. Some roadblocks will take maybe 1 month, 2 months for you to clean, but you need to be able to anticipate to that. So anticipation is key in what you do, and that's what risk management is. A lot of people think on risk management as identify risks, then you are going to classify your risks, or you're going to assess your risk. So you are going to define a risk response. Then you are going to implement the risk response, then you close the risk. And don't get me wrong, this is how you do a risk management process. But in practice, this is how it works. You're going to do risk management by anticipating possible issues, discussing, okay, that might create a problem in the future, 3 months from now. What do we need to tackle this? And then you solve it. If you do that, you are going to still have risks that will turn into issues and you are going to still to handle problem. But I can tell you, if you think in a curve here, if you have a good anticipation, you are going to take a risk level that's here. With a good project management, you put the risk level here. So, just by working on good anticipation. So to wrap up here, a good project manager that's a top achiever or that's a consistent performance, it's good into anticipation, it's good into risk management, it's good in understanding the plan. And here I mentioned some examples of the plan, but you could look for similar challenges with scope, you could look for similar challenges with business case that you need to tackle it. With you could look for interface that you need from the customer, information that you need for the customer. You're going to look into those things, anticipate it, and I'm talking about anticipation depending on the type of project, but you need to think about a window of 3 to 6 months very easily. And you're going to work on that while your team is focusing on the job execution. You are going to think, okay, 3 months from now, what needs to happen? How can I clear this roadblock? Or if I cannot clear it, do I need help? I discuss with my team, do I need to escalate it? And that's how we are going to do it. By doing that, you are going to minimize the number of risks, because while you are mitigating risks, a risk, if it's nothing is done with that, eventually that will turn into an issue. And very often when you get to an issue, this is urgent. So when you have an issue, where's firefighting start? Or very often, depending on the issue, but that's how firefighting starts. Firefight. If you're a lot of project managers on the levels 5 or 6, they only work on the firefighting part. They only work on tackling issues. But because think about the uncertainty, so if you look for a project execution, there in the beginning you have a lot of risks or a lot of uncertainties, and those go down with the time. But you can imagine more risks that you have, more risks if you're not treated, more risks will turn into issue. And more you forget to treat risks, more issues that you are going to have. And at some point you are just working firefighting. That's how a lot of project management work. And that's why to move from practitioner part flow to a consistent performer or top achiever, you need to be able to work into your risk management, or you need to be a master, anticipation master here. You need to be able to do that very well in practice. And that's why in a lot of my programs, I have a high focusing on talking about that. So to wrap up, I've already said that you need to focus if you want to move from this to a 11 practitioner, or if you want to go even a step lower, a step higher, then that means that you are going to refine this skill, or you're going to make even better. You need to have good anticipation mastery skills, which in practice what is risk management skills. If you have more questions, feel free to ask in the comments here. Don't forget to like and share this video here so more people can learn project management there. And also don't forget to subscribe for free for the Project Management Summit. In the Project Management Summit, we are going to talk much more on the Project Management Mastery journey. Here, I just give you some one of the very critical skills that you need to work on there. Again, Project Management Summit is free. Only thing you need to do is click in the link here and subscribe. Thank you, and I'm going to see you there hopefully. Bye.